I couldn't see those things until my motivation was to understand someone. There's something that I posted or shared on Facebook recently that I want to share here.
Maybe this is a sign you need to get off social media.
Maybe so, yeah. I used to think communication was key until I realized comprehension is. You can communicate all you want with someone, but if they don't understand you, it won't reach them the way you need it to.
I love that, because really what I hear is when I validate somebody who I disagree with, my validation is to demonstrate that I understand, I can see their pain, I feel their pain, I'm holding space for that, I'm respecting it, I'm allowing you to lean into that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with your choices, decisions, behaviors, leanings, belief systems,
and you
so
can
on
even
and so forth.
say that, right? You can say that when you're validating someone, but the focus has to be on understanding them.
I would say you cannot say that. Well, you can. You can do whatever the hell you want. But if you want effective communication, you check for understanding. You make sure that the person... So in the Gottmans, we talk about the speaker and the listener role. And I don't go into my side of the story as the listener until the speaker feels like the listener has fully understood and that there isn't anything else that I need to understand before we then switch places, and the listener becomes the speaker and the speaker becomes the listener. And again, then we go right back through to understanding, validation, and we get it to where both parties in the conversation, or all parties in the conversation, feel heard, understood, and validated before we shift into problem solving and my side of the story and my concerns, those types of things. So we tend as humans to enter a conversation with wanting to solve a problem first. Mm-hmm. And that's out of order. If we enter trying to understand what is leading the person to think and feel the way they're thinking and feeling, and then that person feels heard, understood, and acknowledged, then that brain is more willing to course correct, change perspectives, problem solve, set healthy and clear boundaries, those types of things.
Right. Well, and not always are you going to be able to switch roles.
Right. Not always.
That's where you have to check your intention for this. If I come into the conversation with the intention to understand in such a way that I can strengthen this relationship, then I don't feel like at the end it has to be reversed and I have to be understood. That's not my intention.
Sometimes.
My intention
It depends
is
on the
to understand.
depends on
And
the
sometimes
situation.
it will. Sometimes you're going to have conversations where it switches. But then my motivation is also, my intentions can be more than just the one. You know what? I really want to understand where she's coming from, and I would really like it if she can understand where I'm coming from.
So I'm going to challenge you on this.
Well, you haven't done that yet today, so...
Okay. So if I'm having healthy communication with somebody, feeling understood on both participants or all participants' sides most of the time is how you build connection. It's how you deepen friendship. If it's always, I'm coming here to understand you, and then I don't need to be understood back, I think that's a sign that there's a protective barrier there, that it only becomes a one-sided relationship. And if you want deep, meaningful relationships, both participants in the relationship need to feel understood, heard, validated, and like they belong.
I agree completely.
Good. Because if you don't, I'm going to throw something at you.
What I mean is that oftentimes, and I'll take this from my own experience, you said that there had been a complete change in the way that I was working with you after your threat. And there was, but at the time then, I was repairing my inability in the past to be able to understand and to listen. And so for a while, I felt like what was most necessary was for me to be able to hear and understand and validate where you were. And sometimes...
Go ahead, I'm
or
sorry.
after a while, then it could go both ways without any trouble at all. And it has to eventually, if there's going to be a real relationship, like you said, eventually it has to go both ways. But at the beginning, I didn't feel like it could. I feel like I had to spend time just understanding.
And I would say that while I hear what you're saying, and I recognize that you felt that you had to do that in order to save our marriage and course correct and make sure you weren't silencing me, that still would have left. Either I was not in a place where I could hear, understand, and validate you, or you were not safe yet being vulnerable with me on where you were at with that, and that's a sign that growth is needed.
Well, in my particular situation, I would say that both of those things existed.
I can agree with that.
At least I felt like that was the case. So you're agreeing. I mean,
yeah, I can agree with that.
I felt like that was the case. I was not ready to be vulnerable, and you weren't ready to listen to my side of things after feeling silenced for a while. And that's okay.
Yeah.
We were able to move through it. We were able to move past it and build a strong relationship. So the last piece here, I think, is can you talk a little bit about how to validate without agreeing? What are some key pieces of that process that we can do to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the person that is speaking, that we're trying to understand,
right,
without just giving up on what we also hold important, like would happen in religious conversations, political conversations. Oftentimes we feel like we can't listen because if I acknowledge them at all, suddenly I'm not a Republican anymore, right? Or I can't be a Mormon anymore because I acknowledge these concerns about Joseph Smith. So help us to understand what are some tools that we can do, some pieces of that will help us validate better.
The first step is that you have to come into the conversation prepared. And when I say that, you have to come in knowing that some of the things you're going to hear, you're not going to agree with, and be very aware of those defense mechanisms. Pay attention to, am I feeling calm? Am I feeling open? How am I presenting this? Am I getting triggered? But in order to do that, you've got to be able to set your thoughts and opinions on the topic on what I would call, when I'm working with clients, I say on the back burner. You have to step outside of your worldview and be willing to see the issues from the speaker's worldview. So if I'm listening, I have to set my agenda, my thoughts, my opinions aside momentarily. They're in healthy communication patterns. There will be a time for you to pick those back up when you switch roles.
That was harder than I thought it would be. Like from an academic standpoint, it doesn't sound like it would be that difficult.
Oh, it's hard.
But in reality, it was harder than I thought it would be. But I agree completely. You have to be able to do that.
And then I would say the second step is to remember always the emotions come first. We've had a recent experience in our home where I ordered my two youngest kids' shoes around the same day, and one of their shoes got here 2 days before the other kiddo's shoe got there. And the kiddo that got their shoes first ended up being very, very jealous of kiddo that got their shoes second, because in their brain, well, I didn't get new shoes too, 2 days in a row and whatnot. And while me as the parent can sit here and pull my hair out and be like, you just got your new shoes 2 days ago.
Right.
Apparently I needed to wait to hand out the new shoes until both pairs had shown up, whatever.
Not a bad idea.
Whatever the case, right. Kids. But whatever the case may be, I had to sit down with the child who was upset. And before I could tell this child, you got new shoes. You've got to recognize, can we work on being happy for a sibling when something good happens in their life? Before I can start solving the problem and giving the instruction, I have to sit down and help that child identify, I think you're feeling jealous. I think your stomach is feeling tight, and that you're sad that you didn't get a second new pair of shoes today as well. Now, please know that these children are very young children. I'm not talking about my teenagers. Thank goodness. Kids. But my point being that before I can teach the lesson, before I can give the, lecture or whatever, I have to connect emotionally, and I have to be able to tell that child or the person I'm listening to, I have to be able to tell them, I don't like feeling jealous either. It feels awful. It's difficult to figure out, where to go when you're confused or when you're consumed with anger and hatred. And I get that. I've been there. You've got to be honest. Don't tell somebody you get what they're feeling and don't. This is where Sarah starts to struggle, is I'm like, oh, I know what that's like because, and then I talk about my story and then I try and connect it. And that's my ADHD getting in the way. And I've had to learn how to turn that off. And most of the time I do very well. And sometimes I really suck at it, but you've got to be able to connect with the person you're listening to emotionally. And then from their worldview, normalize what they are feeling. Then you switch places and do the same thing. And once both parties feel like they are understood, then we can start working on problem solving. You know, I think one of the challenges when you're coming in to call somebody to repentance, the way that Becca said, is that your intent is almost always misguided.
Yeah.
Because it's not my place to say you're doing it wrong. I mean, you're a full-grown adult to say you're doing it wrong. You're going to mess up your life, and you won't even know how bad it is until we all get to heaven. Like, don't work. Our brains don't work that way, y'all. But to be able to say, I'm concerned about your eternal well-being. You know, what are your thoughts on eternal families? And if you approach it from that curious place that you can understand and say, oh, okay, well, I get that. I remember, Mason, when you and I were in the throes of this and you were still silencing my voice, I remember being very frustrated with you and saying, look, Mason, if I'm wrong, but my intention and my reasons for walking away from Mormonism are sincere, and I truly feel like this is an answer from God that I'm okay to walk away from it, does not his atonement, whatever, work for me according to your own scriptures? And unfortunately, once again, there's contradiction in Mormon doctrine on that. Some say that once you apostatize, you're as good as in hell forever and ever and ever. But most scripture teaches in the Mormon church's own plan of salvation that if I'm leaving the church as an honest person, that I'm truly leaving because I feel like it's what's best and I feel like it's what's right, if I'm wrong, I will go to spirit prison and some Mormon missionary in spirit paradise will come down, help me see the error of my ways, and I will have an opportunity to rejoin you and have our ordinances in the temple redone. Well, that's like the core of Mormon teaching. And once I said that to you, you were like, okay, I don't have to push as hard because that is what we believe.
Well, and you know, maybe the specifics of that whole thing don't work out quite the way that you just explained them.
Yeah, I oversimplified it.
But I think that the reality is recognizing who a person is over what organization they belong to.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing the person and connecting with them on a deep emotional level. You've got to be able to connect emotionally before you problem solve. And when you jump to problem solving first, chances for argument, chances for contention, and emotional wounds, because you don't feel heard, are going to be much, much higher.
Yeah. And I would again just say, check your intention. What is your intention for this relationship? Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Sarah?
No, I'm good. Take the time. I want to go back to bed because my flu headache is starting to make me float.
So take the time when you're in this situation where you need to feel heard, or you know that someone important to you needs to feel heard. Take the time to check your intentions for the conversation, for the relationship, so that you can approach it from the place of understanding, the place of compassion, the place of belonging, so that the relationship can be strengthened by the encounter, not weakened by it. Ultimately, that's what we want, is we want every relationship or every encounter in our lives to strengthen the relationship with the person that we are encountering. And not that that's going to happen, because we all fail. But the more time we spend thinking about what is my intention for this encounter, what is my intention for this encounter, what is my intention for this relationship, what is my intention for this person, we will succeed more, at least more often, and consistently so, as we work to strengthen those relationships. Well, and
I want to give one caveat. If you identify that the person that you're trying to communicate with is unable or unwilling to engage in this way, you need to back off and set a boundary, because when you push those individuals that are not in that brain space, they are not willing to engage with you from a place of understanding, you stand to get hurt. And so sometimes it's better to just say, I'm not ready to have this conversation.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for bringing that up, because absolutely, our best intentions will not change someone else's intentions. And so, as we've talked about before, we need to read the room, we need to read the relationship. We start first by recognizing what is our intention, but we can't ignore what their intention is, or at least the messages that we're getting about their intention. Thank you guys for being here. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that I don't have to lead this very often, but I hope that the discussion can be helpful to us as we're working through the trauma that we have in religious organizations and other things in our lives. And we love you, and we'll see you again next week.